Welcome to the next episode of the HR Mavericks podcast. I'm Garrett Justice, and today I'm joined by Tim Reitsma, who's the general manager and also a podcast host, fellow podcast host over at People Managing People. Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me. How are things going with you?
Doing great today. Yeah, sun shining. It's a hot one outside today, so it's going good. We're glad to have you on the show today. And before we jump into our topic, which I'm super excited about, I want you to tell our listeners just a little bit more about you and your background, and also about People Managing People, the company and the podcast.
Yeah, it sounds good. Well, a little bit about me. My career has taken me all over the place, various different positions. If you think of a squiggly line, you just think of that exaggerated. I've been at one point, a youth pastor. I've been in sales. I've been in operations, quality assurance, tech support. Then I ventured off into consulting and people and culture. Then ended up in HR in the director role, and now as the general manager of People Managing People. And one thing, when I look back at my career, people ask me, how did that happen? I often laugh and go, I say yes to a lot of opportunities, but I think my passion for the intersect of people and process has really been at the forefront. One of my core values is curiosity, and I just love to dig into certain topics and certain areas. And I think that has allowed me to play in a lot of different careers, a lot of different fields.
That's awesome. So before I want to hear a little more of People Managing People also, but before you jump over to that, I want to ask you just a little bit more, because a lot of times I like to ask a lot of our guests, what drew you to the HR or people space? So because you've had all these different experiences, it seems like you've gravitated towards that a little bit more as you've advanced in your career. So what about that space has kind of drew you?
Yeah, I can't say I intended to be in the people space at all. It just didn't even cross my mind. When I went to school, I wanted to study business. I wanted to study operations, process. But I quickly realized early on in some process consulting that, we can make the best process possible, but unless we have our people behind it, it's not going to change. Unless we, now introduce AI and automate everything. But guess what? There's still people behind those engines, those machines. And so that's what really kind of drew me into people leadership. I was presented an opportunity early on in my career to lead a diverse team and across the globe. And I said, sure. I had no idea what I was doing. I quickly realized I had no idea what I was doing, but I had to figure it out. Our HR team at the time was just way too small for the size of company. And luckily I had a great mentor, somebody to help me and guide me, as well as a community of peers to help me along the way. And that had just really drew me into this idea of, how do we best support our people? How do we best support our teams, our leaders? So through that lens of people and HR is that lens of coaching and mentoring and growing our teams, but also growing our leader muscle.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, awesome. Yeah, great. I'll take that promotion. And now, wow, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea how to lead somebody who's in Germany, Japan, or China, or North America. And yet we're kind of thrusted in to figure it out. So
I love that. And if I can just comment on that real quick, because one of the things, in talking to so many different small business, owners, leaders, as well as like HR people, one of the things that I've really noticed through doing that the last few years is the business owners and leaders that I feel like really get it and who are on the forefront realize that while the process, I say process, you say process, Canadian versus American here, right? That while the process of running a business and the operations is vital and important, the foundation of everything is people, right? And it doesn't matter what industry you're in or your business you're in, and that's what I love about what you just said. It's interesting seeing your kind of evolution of, that process operations and still having that, but then realizing so much of that just relies on having the right people, helping them be successful. And I think that sometimes, you forget that in the early days of a business. And, it's all about, if you're the entrepreneur, the founder, right? You start it, you're grinding, and then it evolves a little bit. And eventually your job has to evolve from doing the work to building the team. It's from building the business to building the team, right? So I love that from what you just said.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's you've got to evolve that business, but also putting in a support for people who've never maybe led a team before.
Yeah.
And knowing that, yeah, they're great at their job. They're great at their current position, reading spreadsheets or, whatever that looks like, crunching numbers or, creating widgets on a production line. But are they set up for success when now leading a team that you vitally need them to lead?
So good. So good. Well, so tell us a little bit more about your current role right now and what People Managing People does.
Yeah, currently I lead a small team here at People Managing People as the general manager. And we're part of a larger media company called Black and White Zebra, or BWZ.com, not Z, but Z.com. And so I started back in 2019 really as the podcast host, chief opinions officer, and, a guy who had some ideas about strategy. And I came on full time back in 2021 when the publication really started to get some traction. We've really pivoted our digital publication, into this theme about how can we help you, whether you're a small business owner or an HR or a new leader, how can we help you build a better world of work? That is how we framed our publication and even built out our menus and our offerings. We have 80 plus how-to articles, and our template library is growing, similar to what you have at EHR and the Mavericks. And so we just really want to help people build and create happy, healthy, and productive workplaces. That is the mandate at People Managing People. And so we've got our publication. We also have our tool lists. If you're looking for software, we've got the list for you. Every week we keep adding to that library. And we have our podcast, which is really about how to build a better world of work through that lens of leadership and HR. And, just a little plug there. We've had a recent member of EHR on the podcast. You got to go check it out. Great episode on employee onboarding.
Yeah. And with Jordan on our team, who's awesome.
Yeah, Jordan Bugart, such a fun podcast. And, I'm a little jealous that he gets to go mountain biking, most days, gets up and hits the trails. So that was a fun episode. And then we have a small community, and we're looking to kind of repivot that community into a need around new manager support. And
awesome.
So that's a little bit about us.
Awesome. Well, it's definitely needed. So it's a great space that you're in. And, Tim and I were just talking before we jumped on here that we really feel like, what we're doing with HR Mavericks and trying to do there is so closely aligned with what you're doing. And we see a lot of synergies there. So hopefully, we can continue to help each other and work together on that. So, well, I'm excited to jump into this topic. You kind of pitched this topic of this idea of resilience, and specifically the 3 cornerstones of resilience. So before we jump into the meat of it, tell me a little bit more about what you mean by the word resilience and why you want to talk about that today.
Yeah, it's been something that's been on my mind for many years. Throughout my, I went to university later on in life in my late 20s. And so I had to figure out resilience pretty quickly, trying to get my brain back into actually how to write an exam, which almost didn't happen. But for me, even just by the definition, I think we should start there. It's our ability to work through a crisis and return to a pre-crisis state. So in its simplest terms, it's, there's a crisis. And I think one thing to note right off the bat is what's a crisis for me might not be a crisis for you, Garrett.
Yeah.
So something that I am struggling with and I see as a crisis, when I feel like I'm in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, you might look at that and go, oh, what's the big deal? So I think that's really important to understand that when we look at resilience and define it as getting to that pre-crisis state, we're all so uniquely different. And I think that's where we need to start. So for me, why it's so important, I think, to talk about now is just look at the world around us. We know that there's a pandemic that's still going on. We know there's wars in this world. We know that there's inflation, which is just out of control. We know that there's just so much going on, and it affects us all differently.
Yeah.
And I think it's so, so important that, well, again, like I said, we recognize that it affects us differently. But if we're going through that crisis, that we have a framework in order to help us navigate that crisis to get back to that pre-crisis state. So that's where I came up with the 3 cornerstones or the 3 pillars, whatever we want to call that. Yeah.
Great. I love it. Well, I think you're absolutely right on that point. And I would just point out too that, I think resilience is needed from a personal standpoint for most people today with the craziness going on in the world. But I would also, as we bring that to businesses and especially small businesses, man, there's so much resilience needed because there's constant changes. And I like that word crisis too, because again, there's so many things that are challenges or crises that individuals and teams and small businesses face as a result of the craziness going on in the world, but also just as a result of being a vulnerable small business that's trying to grow and trying to build something, right? And so I think that, it's absolutely crucial for everyone at this time, but especially for those in small business that need this framework, not only in their personal lives, but also to be successful in work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you couldn't be more right on that either. It's, when we think about a small business and running a small business, and we know labor shortages, we know supply chain issues, we know market constraints, and yet, we have payroll to make. We need to support our people, as we talked about at the beginning, and it's hard. Man, is it hard. And what's even harder is when we are trying to do it by ourselves, alone. And that's where, the three pieces that I had come up with is reflecting, reframing, and reaching out. And so in my own personal life throughout this pandemic, unfortunately I had COVID. I was off work for a month. It took me another 3 months to get back into full swing. Plus, I live with an autoimmune condition called Crohn's disease that came back full force. Yeah. So to me, that's a crisis. Yeah. I was like, how am I going to get back to work? How can I make sure I'm, going to be able to support my family? But I had to pause and just sit back and reflect on the situation. Okay, what's going on? What's in my control? What's not in my control? I had to reframe this. Okay, so now I'm at the center of this, but how do I reframe it to say, okay, what could I be doing about this? What else is there? What other support is there? And then reaching out. I don't know about you, but I know for me, if I'm going through something, I usually just put my head down and I just try to work it out by myself. My wife, my partner calls me out on that all the time. You're miserable. Go and talk to one of your friends or your mentors. And so it's so important to reach out for that support.
Yeah, so good. So those 3 steps again: reflecting, reframing, and then reaching out. And so I love each of those. I think that makes total sense. And when you can think about that framework in the moment, I think that can help you progress through each of those stages and get through, whatever crisis it is that you're going through with that resilience. So specifically, I want to bring that framework to, a high performance culture, right? So what's an example of how you apply that, or, as a small business owner, as an HR person, how do you apply that to not only yourself, but at a company level to help people know how to go through this process to be more resilient?
For me, it starts with our leaders and our leadership. So if you're a small business and you're the sole leader, it starts with you. If you are, leading a small team or large team, or you're in HR, it starts with us. And that sounds daunting and it's hard, but a real example, this just happened quite recently, is I was off my game pretty recently, and I work in a hybrid environment. Today I'm at home, but we have an office. Mm-hmm. So I was in the office a few weeks back, and somebody on the leadership team pulled me aside and just said, "Hey, Tim, what's going on? Your energy is different than normal." To me, that is high performance in culture. That's the recognition that something has shifted within a member of the team. And somebody had the care and compassion and the empathy to reach out and say, "Hey, what's going on?" Yeah. Again, for me, I felt myself entering into this crisis state, and that actually, by this person making me pause, I was able to reflect and I reframed the situation. I reached out to a good friend of mine who then helped me reframe everything. But that's where it starts. Yeah. And so often, and I get into this too, is here's the mechanics of the day, the mechanics of the week. This is what the goals, this is what needs to get done. We all say we're fast moving and fast paced. But if we're too fast, who gets left behind? Is somebody getting left behind? And I think that's so important to remember is, take a look at our teams, pause. Even today, if you're listening to this, pause. Somebody being really quiet on Slack, not showing up even on a Zoom meeting or a video conference call like they've normally been. Check in with them. Yeah. It's so important.
So good. And so maybe if I can take a stab at something real quick, what I heard you say is, again, the 3 steps here are reflecting, reframing, and reaching out. But sometimes that reaching out has to come at the very beginning as well, right? If you notice someone is in a little bit of a funk, they might be in a personal or work crisis, reaching out to them to help them identify that, and then helping them understand this process of how they can reflect, reframe, and then continue to reach out to someone else or you again to help them with that issue. Sometimes it starts and ends with that reaching out, right?
Absolutely. It's not a linear path. It's okay. I feel like I'm in a crisis. So the first R is what? No, it could be, for me, this is what's worked for me, is rearranging these in different orders at different times. It depends on the situation. And sometimes, when we look at our teams, a team member might even not know that they're heading for this crisis state.
Yeah.
You might notice that they're agitated. Somebody recently on my team was very agitated. So I had to reach out. How's it going?
Yeah.
And we had a great conversation and we're able to go, okay, what are we going to do to work past that? Let's have that conversation. And yes, I think it's still up to our team members to hear what they need to hear, but also then take ownership of it. And us leaders, there might be a leader saying, well, I've got a team of 15 people. I can't do this for every single person. So, well, it's part of our role as a leader is to guide and coach and grow our teams and inspire them, but also encourage people to take the driver's seat in that career as well.
Yeah, that's so good. One of the things I liked that you said previously was that, it really starts with, people leaders or HR leaders at the company doing it themselves, right? So what's the one thing you would say that today we can do as HR or people leaders or business leaders to just be more resilient ourselves?
Well, to be more resilient ourselves, I think it still comes down to the recognition of something has changed maybe in your reactions or your demeanor. And it comes with that self-awareness, which isn't necessarily that hard or that easy, to develop, but exercising that muscle, after a meeting, taking a pause, how did I show up? At the end of your day, maybe even journal it down. How did I show up today? Did I show up the way that I needed to show up? And if not, what's getting in the way? Yeah. Start recognizing that pattern. Is there a pattern? Is there something that you need to go and talk to your leader about, or maybe find a coach or a great friend? But I would caution the reaching out piece and being careful on who you reach out to. I can get in a big complaining fit, and I'm going to phone up a friend who's going to go, yeah, you're right, Tim, let's go. Is that really the person who's now serving my best interest, or we're just getting each other worked up?
Yeah.
So it's so important to be able to reach out to people who we trust and who are there to maybe challenge our perception, challenge our beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the goal of reaching out to someone should ideally be to get another perspective on how you can overcome the crisis, not fuel it, right? And make it bigger. And I think that happens so often that many of us, a friend calls us up or we call a friend and you kind of build off each other and say, can't believe this happened. Can you believe it? Right. When in the end of the day, like the point of reaching out here is again, as a step in overcoming that crisis, right? Not fueling it further. So I think it's a great point. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I just wanted to build on that. I think you're absolutely right. And so when I was thinking about this simple framework, I was thinking about, well, here's, reflect, reframe, and reach out, but what are the potential threats to this framework? One of them is control. I'm here to control this situation. So again, when we are into this crisis state, or if you're leading a team and you are entering into, you're feeling something has changing in yourself, don't fight it, but also don't compromise. Don't just throw up your hands and say, oh, well, because guaranteed, month, 2 months, 3 months, you're probably not going to be that happy. So there's the opposite of the side of things is just, to watch out for.
Yeah, that's really good. Any other pitfalls or things to watch out for as you use this framework to, become more resilient?
Well, for myself, I was preparing for this podcast and went for a walk this morning and went, am I actually living this? And upon self-reflection, man, I've got work to do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part of control that we often and I'm generalizing here, we might not want to give up. I've got this. I have got so much self-awareness. I don't care about that. So I think it starts with that self-reflection, because, how we show up as leaders comes out in the way we lead.
Yeah.
If we continuously have bad days and we are short and angry and we're just, not pleasant to be around, well, guess what? Our teams are going to feel that. So it starts with us. It doesn't mean we have bad days. We have bad days, but own it, and don't let your life be ruined by bad days.
Yeah, that's a great point. What I really like about this too is sometimes some of us, I'd say myself included, get in this state of mind that we can just grind and push through it, right? Instead of, what I like about this process is being able to recognize that even when things are hard, this gives you a framework to, again, reflect on what is it exactly, reframe that situation, and maybe look for the silver lining in it potentially, and then find solutions to that through help from others. And so, often, again, we just want to power through and it will hope that it will change on its own, right? But what I like about this is it attacks the issue or the crisis at the core and gives you that framework for being able to overcome it instead of just crossing your fingers that it goes away, right?
Yeah. And it's so important. Another piece, which is comparison. How often, even as leaders, we hear somebody in our team is going through something, and I've had leaders, and I've maybe caught myself a time or two just roll my eyes and go, really? Is that really a crisis? Well, to me, it might not be, but to you, it might be.
Yeah.
But also, if we are going through a crisis and, if I'm really down, I can't figure out how to navigate, this, maybe something's going on at work or at home, but I look to you, Garrett, and say, well, Garrett looks like he's got it all together.
Yeah.
Now what? Well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get past this?
Yeah. Great.
And, resilience isn't something that just happens overnight. It's something that we have to build, a muscle that we have to build.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to build it. You got to be willing to go to the gym if you want to get fit. I don't like going to the gym. So I just watch what I eat. But, if you want to build your resilience, you got to start with that self-awareness, the 3 R's, but also, don't look to others to compare your life to, or your team to, or yourself to your team about what they might be going through.
Yeah, great points. Tim, this has been an awesome conversation. I love this framework, and I'm going to go see how I can apply and use this now going forward, because I think we all need it for sure. So I appreciate you joining and sharing some of your thoughts on this topic of resilience. Again, just to recap, those 3 steps or cornerstones that you talked about of resilience are reflecting, reframing, and reaching out. And again, it doesn't have to be linear, but those are 3 of the components of becoming more resilient. So I think that there's definitely applications like we talked about today to, as business leaders, as HR or people leaders, how we can apply this and bring this to our teams, help give them this framework so that they can overcome the resilience in their personal lives, which everyone's facing with the craziness going on in the world, and also in their work life, which we're all going to face crises and need some of that additional resilience. So this has been such an awesome conversation. As we wrap up here, I have a question that I want to ask you that's not necessarily related to our topic today, but I'm curious to kind of pick your brain on. There's a few questions that I like to ask all of our guests before we wrap up. And one of them is really about what's something someone can do today and to improve. And I think you've shared some of that. So I want to ask you a slightly different question today than I ask a lot of our guests recently. And that's, what's a commonly held belief that you think a lot of small business leaders have, especially related to, the HR or people space that we've talked a lot about, that you disagree with? So a commonly held belief that many people have that is something that you passionately disagree with.
Oh, I don't think we have enough time. So
I need to ask this one at the beginning next time.
Yeah, it'll be a 30-minute conversation. I have seen, and I've been part of organizations where HR is just an afterthought. HR is the position you bring in when the company reaches 60 to 100 people. And I fundamentally disagree with that. If we want to build thriving businesses, people build those thriving businesses. How do we best support our people to grow in their career on the business side, but also on the human side of the business? So if you're looking to grow leaders, who's going to help you? Who's going to help build your leadership team? That's where HR comes into play. HR is seen as just often still, this is just administrative overhead, non-value add, just takes money out of the business. But man, if you can make that tie to employee engagement, happy employees, as I said at the beginning, our purpose here at People Manage People is to build a better world of work. Happy, healthy, productive people. We have engaged employees who are thriving in their job. They know what they're responsible for, know what they're accountable for. Man, that's going to lead to productivity. That's going to lead to profits. That's where HR can help.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So what a great thought, because man, I've seen it over and over again, especially again with small businesses. I talked about this a little bit earlier in this show, but I've seen that, chasm, if you will, that business leaders have to cross, where at some point early in the business, they're 100% focused on building the business, but at some point they have to transition from building the business to building the team and the people. And if they don't do that, it's going to limit and stunt their growth. And so seeing, HR and people operations as a strategic function rather than an administrative function, if you can do that earlier on in the life cycle of your business, man, the sky's the limit for what you can accomplish when you help your people to be more productive, right?
And just even if you're just worried about saving cost, it takes somebody hours to even update employee records. Automate that. Just get yourself an HRIS. They're not that expensive. Get yourself some systems to support you. So less time in administration, more time in helping and growing your business.
Exactly. Yep. I totally agree. We have one of those. If anyone's looking, come hit me up. So Tim, thank you again so much for being on the show today. Last question I have for you is, if there are listeners who want to get in touch with you, have follow-up questions, what's the best way for them to do that?
A best way is through LinkedIn. Just head there. I think the link will be in the show notes. Also, would love for you to check out peoplemanagingpeople.com. I've actually written an article on resilience, so you can find that there. I think maybe we'll put that link in the show notes as well, and lots of supporting content around how to create and build a happy, healthy, and productive workplace.
Awesome. We will definitely drop those links in the show notes. So if you're listening, driving somewhere, don't worry about writing anything down. Just go to the show notes, find it afterwards. So Tim, thank you again for taking the time to be with us today and teach us about resilience. Hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks. You too. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.